Wow. Hi, everyone. How are we doing? Doing well? Energized? Good, good. So I'm here today to talk about the democratization of innovation and actually shifting away from the way we've done innovation in the past with this idea of moving away from castles to empowering villages. Of course, that sounds a bit sort of Games of Thrones, doesn't it? And if it was Game of Thrones, I would introduce myself as Ross from the House of Targaryen, the breaker of silos, and the father of mules. But it's not that, so I won't introduce myself that way. But what do I mean? What am I talking about today? Well, I was earlier at a lunch, and I was speaking to some of the executives that are at this event today, and I was speaking to a fertilizer company. A gentleman named Patrick was talking to me about how they're using our platform and an API strategy to enable digital farming. And it makes you realize how far-reaching this idea of innovation and driving change in the way things have been done over the last 150, even 20 or 10 years. And the reality is everyone now has an innovation agenda. And they have it because the world around them is moving so fast. And it's no longer about the big eating the small. It's all about the fast eating the slow. And the challenge is, at scale, innovation is difficult. Every company struggles to innovate. It's actually much easier with 4 people in a garage with no limitations but no resources to innovate than 4,000 people in an organization who have unlimited resources, because you're sort of beholden by the things that you did in the past. And breaking away from that's actually really challenging. And over the next 2 days, you're going to be hearing from customers that are making those changes within the organization so that they can innovate. And the reality is the nature of innovation has changed. This is one thing I'll be talking about today. And there really is a cultural shift. And if you don't embrace that shift, if you close one eye and you say it's an IT problem, or you close the other eye and say it's a business problem, you're going to be treading water. You're not going to be able to keep up, and people will be surpassing you. And we'll talk about some examples there where this is really happening. And our approach here is that you should really embrace the notion of building these innovation building blocks, these APIs. APIs have become the fundamental software construct, if you like, of exchanging value between anyone in an ecosystem, and it's driving massive changes in the way we interface with everything, the way we automate workflows, the way we actually work, live, travel, everything. And I fundamentally believe, I think everyone knows what an API is, and I think you understand what they look like at a fundamental level. What I want to do today is really broaden your horizon of how you think about the role of APIs in innovation and your day-to-day lives, but also the value and reach of those APIs. What's super interesting, because we're predominantly an IT audience here, is IT hasn't been at the forefront of innovation. Actually, most of the innovations happened at the front of the business. But now for the builders, the developers, the architects, the people who actually build stuff in the organization, they're right in the middle of this new innovation agenda. The things that you build next are the things that are going to last. They're the things that open up the organization, enable new products and new services. And so I want you to think about that. It's a profound change that's happened in the last couple of years, where IT used to be really a deliverer of projects. They took orders from the business. But now the things that you build, the APIs that open up the data, the capabilities, the functions that we build the new products and services with, are within your domain. And that's pretty amazing, right? So your role has changed. And so the point of this presentation is to really expand that horizon and help you think around what's possible. Because as you start to open up your business through APIs, you can start to think about new business models, new types of products and services, new ways of going to market. And I'll have some customer examples come up on stage and talk about what they're doing there, both in insurance and actually in the government, which typically we don't always think of as innovative, but innovation's happening everywhere now. And the whole point of this is to really think about how to unlock the value of your organization. Now, here's the safe harbor statement. This is like the buzzkill of anyone who's on stage. So I'm going to give you 3 seconds to read it. I assume you've read it. 3, 2, 1. All right, excellent. So So the challenge with innovation is it has changed, right? So innovation, you could used to just deliver an interesting product, send it to market, and you would garner response from the market. But what's happened is the nature of innovation's changed. So if we take a company like Square, Square's original innovation was a little dongle that you plugged into the audio jack of your phone, and it could take a credit card swipe. And immediately what it did, it turned the iPhone and Android into a point-of-sale system that anyone could accept payments over credit card, which powered a whole ecosystem of small businesses and independent vendors. Right, and from there, they started expanding into e-commerce, in-app payments. They started offering point-of-sale systems. And the reason they could move so fast is because when you did that credit card swipe on your phone, they then took that data, sent it through an API into their back-end processing systems, and essentially cleared the payment with you and brought it back again. Right, it seems very straightforward, but what it's allowed Square to do is completely redefine the way small business interacts with their customers, but also the way in which they take payments. And it's turned them into a multi-billion-dollar company through a very simple type of innovation. Right, and it wouldn't have been possible to branch out into the other areas if they hadn't taken an API-first approach. Right, if they just built a credit card reader with an app on the phone, and then had to build out e-commerce separately, it just wouldn't have worked. So there's the innovation where you come up with a new idea and then you deliver it digitally. And the other type of innovation that we see a lot of, especially in the enterprise, is where you streamline a process and you make it easier for customers to do business with you. And typically these processes, what they do is they break down the silos of product. So they allow a consumer to execute a transaction across multiple vendors, which used to be a complicated process, to something much more simple. And a great example of companies doing this in the mortgage space are people like TikTok or Atom Bank in the UK or Rocket Mortgage in the US. And what they've done, they've taken a 3-week mortgage process and reduced it down to about 20 to 30 seconds on the phone. And if you've ever bought a house before, you'll know how laborious it is to fill in all the forms for a mortgage process and all the back and forth you have with the mortgage broker and the banks and everything else. Well, what they've done is they've automated that. They've actually reached out to all these other providers. They do the reference checks. They do the they do the credit checks. They validate your information. They do this all automatically within 20 or 30 seconds, and 80% of the time they can give you a mortgage approval. But that's a massive difference. That's a massive game-changing interaction for consumers. It's not new. It isn't really innovation in the way we sometimes think about innovation, but it is innovation because it makes the consumer's lives easier. It creates a sense of delight and a sense of value in the mind of the consumer. And we're seeing a lot of innovation in the enterprise space look a bit like that. The challenge with most organizations is innovation models no longer work in today's context, right? So we've had siloed teams, right? People work within their own product lines. They're not working across products, which makes it very hard to do services or products that actually transcend the boundaries of the organization, which is a challenge. Data is difficult to access. So one of the things MuleSoft's been doing for many years is helping unlock that data through integrations and also APIs. And people don't have access to the capabilities and assets within the organization. So most of the time when you're delivering a project, there is nothing to respond to. People can't go to the API app store within your organization and figure out what data sources and what capabilities they can bring together to build new products and services. Well, that's starting to change. Right, and when we talk about ecosystems, an ecosystem is a set of usually developers or individuals or companies that can get access to resources that you offer to plug them into other applications, other products and services. And this is not a new concept. In fact, most innovation over the last 10 years has been driven by this very type of capability. So if you think about the smartphone was definitely a leap forward. The full touch screen kind of changed the way we thought about using our phones. But the apps on those phones is really what drove the behavioral change and the real value in the device itself, right? Those apps fundamentally changed how we did everything in our day-to-day lives. And each one of those apps is comprised of 10, 15, 20 open APIs on the web. So think about Uber. Uber didn't, their front screen is a map. Now, in the old world of doing innovation, they would have said, well, that's our front screen. We have to own that experience, so we're going to build our own mapping technology. That wouldn't have made any sense. They just used Google Maps. They didn't build payments themselves. They went to Stripe, which is an API for embedding payments inside applications. They then realized that drivers and passengers needed to connect with each other in real time, so they used telephony services from Twilio. You see, they just borrow the capabilities that are already out there to build a new consumer experience. And then, so they're consumers of APIs, so they're a consumer in that ecosystem of open APIs, but they also then produce APIs, right? So Uber Eats is an API they produce, they put back into the consumer ecosystem, and that means anyone who wants delivery services where Uber operates, which is pretty much everywhere, they can now plug into the API and start doing logistic food delivery through Uber. It's pretty incredible, but that's what we mean by ecosystems. That's what we mean by how innovation is driven through these ecosystems. It's by opening up the asset securely and managing it the right way, and then giving it to people so they can plug it into their own applications, their own services, is really how innovation is done today. I'll talk about another example, which is Hertz. So Hertz have been under a lot of pressure, thanks to people like Uber and ride-sharing in general and autonomous vehicles coming down the pipe. And if you've rented a car in the last 5 years, you'll know that the friction in actually obtaining that car is quite, there's quite a lot of friction there, because it was built in an era when we didn't expect to be able to just jump into a car and jump back out again and track it on our phone. Now, with Hertz, part of their growth strategy has been, okay, we need to expand into geographies where we're not as strong, and they decided they wanted to go to South America. Now, in the old way of doing innovation, what they would have done is they might have actually bought retail locations and gone down to South America, which would have been very expensive. Or they might have partnered with someone down there and done point-to-point integrations with the basic systems to make sure that they could at least clear reservations in another country. But what they did in this era of innovation is a bit different. They chose Localiza as a partner, but rather than connecting directly to that organization, what they did is they had an API strategy to unlock all the core elements of what makes Hertz from a partnership standpoint, so fleet management, order management, customer management, loyalty, those sorts of things. And they opened it up as a set of APIs. And then they connected those APIs, or they actually asked Localiza to connect their systems into those APIs. And you might think that's a lot of overhead. Actually, it isn't, right? It's because, A, building APIs isn't really that expensive. It's become very easy. The tools, like Anypoint platform, but also other tools, have made it much easier for developers to build these things in a matter of days versus weeks or months. But also, it's become a lot more intuitive. People understand, okay, if I need access to loyalty information, building an API for that's not actually that difficult. And then they connected to Localiza, and what that allowed them to do was connect into 400 locations in South America and expand Hertz's brand. But because they did it this way, they didn't just connect into their centralized booking system, they also collected it into the kiosks and the app as well. So what they allowed them to do is very quickly, in a matter of 4 months, switch on a whole new continent for renting cars under the Hertz brand and providing a consistent experience across all those channels. And that's the other key point here, is the APIs provide a consistent capability across any digital channel. So if you think about where we are now, we're just getting started. 5-10 years from now, it will seem ludicrous not to have your key assets and key capabilities opened up as anything other than APIs. Now, with Hertz, they weren't always, they weren't thinking in an innovative fashion, right? Like most companies, they had to have an impetus, and for them, they got Ubered, right? Uber came along, just completely changed the dynamic of when and why you need a car, and if you ask them what it's like to feel Ubered, do you know what they'd say? It hurts. And so they had to think differently. And it forced them, that pain actually forced them to think differently and make a cultural shift in the way they were thinking about their business. And this I cannot stress enough. APIs, ecosystems, thinking about innovation, none of that actually matters unless you start thinking differently about the value of your digital assets and how you're going to open them up to people. Organizations for tens of years have been holding their assets close to their chest and not letting anyone in, not letting anyone get access to anything. And that's hurt organizations. It was done to protect secrets, protect data. Now there's just ways of opening up assets, opening up capabilities in a way that you can do it securely, you can track it, you can switch it off at any time, you can control it. And that's the API. That's the key innovation turn, if you like, that enables companies like yourselves to start opening things up more and thinking about enabling ecosystems in a different way. So for Hertz, the mindset shift wasn't that we had to go and build APIs, but it was actually we had to think about how we would extend our brand into other geos, other types of services, how we'd actually partner differently with our ecosystem. And it actually started, if you think that way, the relationship that has to change the most is the relationship between IT and the business. And like every other IT organization, or most that we speak to, the mindset of IT has been sort of inside out, where business is actually giving orders to IT, they're giving projects to IT, and IT is delivering them on a project treadmill. Right, so you get a project done, you measure how quickly you deliver those projects, and you move on to the next one. The problem with that is you end up just building stuff, delivering it, and you never really understand really what the business is trying to do, or even better, what the consumer really might need in the next 18 months to 2 years. And so when you think about employee experiences or customer experiences, IT hasn't been that connected to that conversation. And you're relying on the business who should know how it should look to define the projects to make those experiences happen. But in reality, the shift to APIs means that IT's responsibility is to create the assets, to make those assets available, to build those experiences, and the business has to take more ownership on delivering those experiences to the customer. And what it ends up looking like is more of an inside-out approach, where IT and the business are much more closely aligned, not on specific projects, but actually on initiatives and the type of capabilities that you want to deliver to your customers, the type of products and services, the types of automations you want to make available within the organization. And then you build those APIs around those projects that deliver those capabilities so that the organization can move faster. So rather than me talk about this any further, what I'd like to do is introduce a customer that's been on this journey for a few years. And at DWP, which is a government organization, they've made great strides in really opening up some key capabilities to provide a better set of government services. So rather than me talk anymore, I'm going to introduce Jackie onto stage, please. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, Ross.
Great to see you. Okay, thanks for joining me on stage. So first off, why don't you just introduce yourself and your role and a bit about DWP?
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Jackie Legater, and I'm the Head of Integration at Department of Work and Pensions. So at the Department of Work and Pensions, we support 22 million citizens at any given time. And that's a broad range of citizens, from children through child maintenance schemes, to young people moving into the workplace and apprenticeship schemes, work coaching for people who are out of work, looking for work, and also supporting people who are unable to work through ill health or disability. We also support pensioners, financial support when you reach pension age, so we cut across the whole of society in the UK. We issue round about 700 million to £1 billion worth of payments every single day, and that touches about a third of the UK population. And if you're all lucky enough to get to pension age and get a pension, you will be a user of our services. So my role in DWP is Head of Integration, and my responsibility is making sure that all of our systems, we have around 320 systems, can integrate and talk to each other in a secure manner. And one of our big strategies moving forward is moving to an API ecosystem.
Fantastic. So, I mean, that sounds pretty complicated. So, what were the key challenges you were facing before you started working with MuleSoft and you started adopting an API strategy?
So the biggest challenge that we faced was being able to share our data. The demands on using data and reusing data that we already have is increasing and increasing. And with the political uncertainty, the exiting the EU and not having a clear picture of what that means for our citizens, and just giving better services to citizens, particularly not just within DWP but cross-government, was a really big challenge. And what the big change for us was historically we've created our data in silos and we lock it down, and getting access to it is really, really difficult. So opening that up for reuse and sharing was a big challenge for us, that we started stopping having to break in and get the data and open it up and make it available for reuse. It doesn't make sense to be asking citizens to submit the same information 3-4 times to achieve a single outcome.
That's great. So give us an example of one of those services that provided a very different outcome for DWP.
Yeah, so one of our recent projects is working cross-government with our NHS colleagues for a free prescription check. For any of you who have felt a bit poorly and had to get a prescription from your GP, you will go into your pharmacy and the pharmacist will ask you to sign the prescription on the back or pay your prescription fee. The rules around free prescriptions are really complicated, and a lot of citizens aren't sure or are unaware if they're entitled to free prescriptions, so they tick the box or pay the fee. And we've been working with the NHS to provide a real-time check for them, so that at the point where the citizen hands in the certificate, if they're not sure, the pharmacist can check real-time, calling an API that's produced by DWP and consumed by the NHS. So at that point of sale, or the point of dispensing that prescription, the check is done, rather than 6 weeks after the event, post-checking, and where it's proven to be inaccurate, lots of recovery action. So having that real-time view, impactful on the NHS because they're not wasting money chasing recovery or refunds, and from the citizen's perspective, being able to get the right outcome at the right time, right at the fingertips. So that's been one of our most impactful projects.
So this is great, and when we were talking about this, because it sounds like it's just one API, but it actually isn't, right? The way you've thought about building this, you've thought of reuse, and you've thought about in a much broader context. So I'd love to, can you dig into a bit of how you actually built this service and give a bit more detail for the audience how it actually works?
Yeah, so when we built the service, we started off thinking about it as a passport benefit checker for the free prescriptions. And when we looked in our backlog and saw actually there's a load of other government departments looking for the same type of information, so free school meals, help to save programs in HMRC, blue badge schemes from local authorities, qualifying conditions all depend on whether or not we have certain benefits in payment. And as we were building those services, we started to think about, we don't build this as an NHS free prescription service, we build a reusable passport benefit checker service. So what we did was took the NHS business rules and built a very, very thin business layer, the business microservice, and then below that we built very, very thin services, check name, check address, check benefit award, and then doing so by building all of those services and exposing them as an API. Although we've built a passport benefit checker service, we've actually created from that one service 6 very, very highly reusable APIs through that layering.
So I'm going to just paraphrase a little bit there because I think it's a great story, but you're also calling out to lots of other systems, some that you own but some that you don't own, and you're packaging that up into this passport service.
Absolutely.
That's critical.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So getting those benefit rates out of various systems and from various sources and pulling them in and making them available and making them discoverable for our development community who may be looking at other means somebody else may want to check a name or check an address, and providing those as services that are easily discoverable for reuse is really critical to us. Yeah.
Great. So, I mean, you're fairly far along this journey. So, what are some key learnings along the way, and maybe one or two that sort of stuck with you over this period?
So I think for me, some of the key learnings is don't talk about the API, talk about the service and the value that it brings. Bring your executive team on the journey with you. Make sure you're clear about why you're doing what you're doing, and tell it from a business perspective, not from an API perspective. I think also when it comes to business case development and selling the story, think about one or two key projects, which is the rationale for you doing what you're doing. You don't need to know everything up front because it's an evolution. And taking those one or two business use cases, that's the language that your execs will understand, and will start to get that buy-in at a senior level.
Excellent. And then finally, just to wrap up, how does the API strategy enable what DWT wants to deliver to serve your citizens better?
So going forward on our journey developing this passport benefit check service, and that's just one of many services that we've built for reuse. It's made us think more about our product silos. So currently, like most organisations, we fit citizens into a product. So you're a pensioner, you're a working age person, or you're a child. And in reality, the citizen could be touching 2 or 3 of those services. So our strategy going forward is to break down those product silos and build the common componentry that underpins those products, and have a very, very thin business layer that has the bespoke business rules, so that everything we build, it's built with reuse in mind, and our governance and whole design approach is changing to a reuse first. So it's breaking down all of those product silos and digital delivery silos.
That's fantastic. Great story. Thank you so much for coming up here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So a couple of great takeaways there. One is, don't talk about the API, talk about the value it provides. Makes a ton of sense, right? But we often get wrapped up in the technology and how it works, and not so much about the outcome. And the other one is, really, we just heard it again there, innovation isn't necessarily about inventing something new, but just actually streamlining the way things happen, automating it so that people get a more immediate response and a better level of service. And I think that's really where a lot of innovation in many enterprises is happening at the moment. Okay, so there's really 3 steps, broad steps if you like, for executing an API strategy. The first one is the whole point of the API strategy is actually to create leverage. You have these digital assets in your organization, but they're not leveraged. They're not packaged in a way that people can get access to. As Jackie said, they have to break in to get the data. They have to break in to get the capabilities. And what you want to be able to do is they should be able to ask permission, and they should be monitored to get the data and capabilities, and you just look after that connection. Secondly, you've got to build for the broader village, right? We're not used to doing this. We tend to build services one-off or for our own internal use so that we can move faster. The whole point of APIs and the ecosystems that develop around those APIs is that you package the asset in a way that other people can use and get successful with, right? And give you a really quick example. Think about Google Maps. Google Maps is a very complex set of systems behind the curtain, but when you ever embed Google Maps into an app or into a web page, it's very, very simple. They abstract all the complexity away so people can use it and get successful with it, and then they layer on the capabilities afterwards. And then finally, you have to nurture these APIs. It's not enough just to build them and people will come. You actually have to think about how do people know where the APIs exist? How do they know where to go? How do you train the rest of the organization to know what to look for? When they start using the API, how do they get help? How do they find out where to get help? Right, these are all things that we cover over the next day and a half. So, tune in to anything around ecosystems or, central for enablements, which are really the teams of people that wake up every morning thinking about how to get your organization to adopt and be successful with the APIs that you create. But let's start with creating leverage of digital assets, because this is step one. I think many of our customers are well down the path on this. For new prospects, you might be thinking about the right approach here. And what MuleSoft does is we recommend a 3-layered approach to unlocking assets with APIs. And the first layer is a system layer, if you like, and what it does, it just creates consistent managed access to applications. And the reason you need this layer, even if you have APIs at that layer, is because you want to be able to centralize, manage, control the access, governance, security, and information flow that's going in and out of these APIs, accessing these applications. So that's the first layer. The second layer is actually about bringing different bits of data from the APIs down below into more reusable concepts, like orders, like customer, where you'll take fields from maybe 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 different back-end sources to create something that's meaningful to that part of the business. These APIs become the most reused because they are APIs that are sort of crafted around things that make sense to the business and things that you want to plug your applications or services around. And then finally, there's this other layer called the experience layer. And the experience layer is really there to define the experience you want to give your consumers. And because APIs have gotten very cheap to build, it's very easy to define an API that actually mimics the exact experience you want to provide to your consumers. We made lots of mistakes from the web to the mobile world where we tried to use the same data sources, the same constructs from each format. And what we've realized, of course, is you get a suboptimal experience if you try and blend those worlds. And as we move to voice, as we move to full automation and algorithms to automate a whole bunch of the things that developers might do today, having an experience API really matters because it captures all the meta information about how to access a system. And then when we talk about ecosystems, designing an API for developers in the same way as Google designed their API for developers is really important. So you may still have your mobile app, your web app, but you also have a developer API that helps other people discover and use the assets available in your organization to deliver new products and services. And of course, if you're not familiar, we call this API-led connectivity. And it's a methodology and really a set of architectural principles. Actually, it's an architecture to help organizations, no matter how complex, to start to break apart the complexity, the monoliths, into reusable components that you can manage and run independently and evolve independently. Right, now for my next customer speaker, we're going to be talking a bit around how, what they've done with their API strategy, but importantly, also how they've changed the mindset within their organization. Because the biggest thing here isn't really tomorrow go and build APIs, but it's really how do you help the organization, both the business side, but also IT, understand the value of those APIs and actually start moving in the right direction. Right, so rather than me tell the story, I'm going to invite Ben Turner to stage, and he's going to talk a bit more about legal in general. Ben? Great to see you.
See you, Rob.
Thanks for coming down. Great, so just a quick intro to yourself and what you're doing at Legal in General.
Okay, my name's Ben Turner. I'm the CTO for the General Insurance business. Essentially responsible for technology, direction, innovation, architecture, and keeping all the systems running day to day for IT. So quite a broad remit, but all of the IT team essentially reside in my world.
Got it, okay. So what challenges were you facing before you started to rethink your approach to integration and APIs?
I think probably not. Most of these challenges I would say are probably not uncommon, but I think when I first turned up in the business, everything was kind of point-to-point integration. There was no reuse. People kept, I guess, repeating the same things. We would build everything 20 times over, and I think really that drove the wrong behaviours, and ultimately it made the business always accuse us of being expensive. Everything we did was expensive. And I think at times probably stopped us doing some of the innovation or work that we should be doing or wanted to do, because we were seen to never be able to do anything in a kind of the right scale or the right approach.
Okay, so what was the light bulb moment for you that spurred you to make the changes that you made?
Week 2.
Week 2. Right.
Yeah, week 2 kind of I realised that I think between myself and a lot of the rest of the team in IT that we were fundamentally doing something wrong, and we needed to kind of reinvent ourselves a little bit. And I guess ultimately we were looking to disrupt ourselves. So we decided we needed to do something different. We needed to kind of, I guess, reinvent ourselves. So that was kind of, I think, the light bulb moment in that space. Okay, so give us an example of a project you delivered the new way, and then let's dig into how you got there. I guess SmartQuote is probably where I would start. SmartQuote is a shortened question set for insurance. It's household insurance. We ask about 5 questions, all things that you would know yourselves: your address, your name, date of birth, etc. And that was something we launched a few years ago. We essentially decided that was the product that we should wrap APIs around. And the reason we wanted to do that was essentially our vision was to create a new, if you like, ecosystem, somewhere where our partners could consume that service and ultimately all of our products from that same ecosystem, but also that external ecosystem was not only for us to expose our services, or SmartQuote as a service, as I like to talk about it, but also where we could consume big data or take, I don't know, address lookup services or something else that is relevant to the insurance world, where other people were already doing that and we could consume that as a service rather than creating it ourselves.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, with SmartQuote, you had to go and call other services because you had to answer the questions another way, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think typically we used to ask 50 plus questions to get that insurance quote, and most of the time people probably don't know the answer to some of these questions. I think the way we did SmartQuote was kind of utilising that external API network and pulling that stuff in. I guess that's only further driven what we've been doing in the background with our API strategy, etc.
Okay, so when you went in week 2, you realized that it wasn't going the way you wanted. How did you get people on board? How did you get people to move to, even thinking differently about how to deliver some service like this?
It's, I guess for anyone, and probably most businesses, that's a challenge. One of the first things I kind of did, and actually it was from a question I was actually asked from the CEO. What were the 3 kind of main technology changes we should make to become a digital insurer, a more kind of an insurer of the future, if you like. Those kind of core things were around DevOps. That was kind of the first thing I thought we should do: in-house capability, being able to do things ourselves rather than kind of being reliant on other third parties. The second was cloud, adopting that cloud model. Not only consuming kind of cloud services, but also acting in that way. And the third thing was integration, essentially removing point-to-point connectivity and using the power of APIs to kind of exploit our services as well as use other people's. Those were the kind of core things I talked to our CEO about, and took our CEO on the journey, and essentially got agreement to do all of it. So the last 18 months, 2 years have been a roller coaster. They've been pretty exciting, mainly because we've been doing many things all at the same time. But I think it's really helped to drive that mentality. And also, I think if you get that buy-in from the very top, it's easier. It pushes down into the rest of the business, and you change that mentality, I think.
Okay, and just because you got the CEO buy-in doesn't mean that your developers are suddenly going to change the way they do things. So how did you think about the cultural change within the IT organization, especially the delivery org?
So I guess a slightly, connected story, and I won't name this person, but our head of architecture essentially said to me that they didn't think the API kind of adoption, that ecosystem, creating, the ability for partners to connect and consume our services without having to kind of run a full-scale project, was something that would really exist in the insurance world. It wasn't something that was done today, and it kind of couldn't see it being adopted, basically. Didn't see those new partners coming to the table, people wanting to sell insurance that traditionally hadn't been doing it. And I kind of, I took that on the chin, if you like, but that wasn't my belief. And I guess success for me was the day that person turned around to me and said he was wrong, because he'd seen actually the benefit of what we were doing, new partners coming to the table wanting to kind of get involved with what we're doing, and actually that the world was changing, and insurance actually was an evolving area, and I think was kind of ripe for disruption and innovation.
That's great. It's a great story. Thank you so much, and appreciate you being here today.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, lots of key takeaways there, but I think the big one for me is the world has changed, right? 3 or 4 years ago, even a couple of years ago when they started their journey, it wasn't clear that insurance should be API driven and that you have these digital channels to reach out to other brokers and other types of insurance companies. And what we're seeing time and again in our customer base is it is making a difference as they start to build out these services. Their consumer dynamic, both for B2B and B2C, is changing dramatically. So let's talk a bit about, right, once you have these APIs, what does it mean to build out ecosystems, right? We all think of APIs as a very developer-centric concept, which it is. And so the first people you end up enabling with APIs is usual central IT. Remember, the goal here is to change the culture in the organization. So IT doesn't have to deliver everything on their own, but they start to offer APIs to other parts of the organization so they can deliver some of their things on their own, right? Or they can offer it to third parties, in the case of Legal General, so they can plug into their smart quote and start running policies and embedding that inside their applications. So the first step is attracting developers. APIs are well known to developers. It's very hard to build apps these days without understanding how an API works. But it's the first step. The second step is actually to extend further. Right? APIs can actually be packaged up into other types of assets. So for data APIs, you can actually wrap a data source around an API and embed it in Excel. You can embed it in Tableau. And you can give those APIs to people who have no idea what an API is, but know how to plug a data source into their reporting tool to drive analytics. Right? So think more broadly than just enabling developers and applications, but think about also reporting, analytics, access to data for all sorts of reasons. And then finally, as we heard here, I mean, the holy grail here is to open up to third-party organizations. Now, most organizations don't do that straight away because there's a bit of a learning curve and getting comfortable with both creating APIs and driving consumption of those APIs. But the way you drive the innovation, the way you democratize that innovation is by opening those APIs up to a more broader audience of people. Sometimes in large organizations, that just means other divisions, especially in banks. In smaller organizations, that means opening up to ecosystems or partners or even public developers. It just depends on your business and what type of service you're offering. And then finally, the other key thing here is to nurture these API programs. Now, this is a very different motion for IT organizations. IT is being structured to build projects, deliver projects, and then stop that project and start the next project. With APIs, they're living, breathing, basically they're products. They live beyond the scope of any one project. You still deliver some projects, but those projects leverage those APIs to move more quickly. And some of those projects you now push out to other consumers inside the organization to go and deliver on their own. But in order for those APIs to get better over time, there has to be an organization within IT that wakes up every morning and is looking after the ecosystem. They're making sure people know where the APIs are. They help people when they get stuck using those APIs. They're granting or revoking access to those APIs. They are also taking feedback. Right, so as they're helping users, they're taking feedback, and the APIs that are popular, you start feeding that back into IT, and IT is responsible for actually managing those APIs over time. Right, so even though you might not be delivering all the projects, you absolutely manage all the APIs inside the organization that the other parts of the organization are using. Now, MuleSoft is sort of uniquely positioned really to enable these thriving ecosystems. We've been thinking about this for a long time, and our platform combines integration and APIs in one platform. And that's not by accident. It was purely because what we realized was all information actually lives in databases and applications, so you need integration. But you also need APIs to make those connections reusable, make them more accessible to a broader audience of people, and actually allow everyone on a single plane to be able to communicate with each other. And that is what the application network is. It's a way of just organizing APIs and applications and resources in a way that you can manage increasingly more complex connections between systems and understand how things are working. Right, so some of the key capabilities here is really managing those building blocks, making sure people can find them, discover them, use them. We have something called Exchange that allows you to create an app store for these reusable APIs. Security is critical in these models, right? So we're moving away from perimeter-based security, especially in the cloud. And in each one of these nodes, security is built in. You actually can apply policies to a single node or parts of the network or the whole network. So what we allow you to do is actually to evolve your governance rules and your security rules independent of the services and the APIs that you're running. This is really important because you don't really want to be tying code release cycles with things like security or regulatory changes because they happen so frequently. And then finally, we're really democratizing innovation. What we're trying to do here, and what we've done, in fact, with many organizations, is really expose those reusable assets in a way that other people can discover and use, and provide all the know-how and the sort of software capabilities, but also the best practices and IP around what organizations need to do to get successful, enabling an API strategy inside your organization, all the way from building to consumption to driving ecosystems. Now, the application network itself is just an evolutionary architecture. It's something that our platform manages under the covers, and every time you build a project, you add one or more nodes on that network. By connecting to an application, by creating an API, you're essentially creating new resources on that network. And that network is basically a graph. And think of it like Facebook. And Facebook, when it announced its graph, just knew how friends connected to each other. And then it started adding more and more metadata about the relationship between those friends and how they work. We're doing the same thing with the application network. We're looking at this thing holistically. What it allows you to do is get much better operational insights, much better drill down into root cause analysis when things go wrong, much faster detection of anomalies or attacks, much easier ability to cordon off areas without shutting down everything around it, so you really understand what's going on. So this approach really helps you to not just open things up, but also to manage a more complex landscape, because frankly, every organization that we work with is using software in every corner of the business. And the role of the application network is to normalize the communication between all those systems and the people in those organizations. So you build these up project by project. So you don't need to go and build an application network. It's being constructed every time you deliver a project on our platform. And our platform, you'll hear a lot more about it for the next 2 days, so I won't spend much time on it, but it's been built from the ground up to enable you to do this. Right? It's been our hypothesis that the way in which companies will drive competitive advantage is not through the applications they run, but the way in which they connect their applications together. So from the ground up, we've been very focused on not just the connectivity, but really how do we drive leverage of the assets? How do we get them into the assets to the hand of people that can actually go and build the applications and services? And how does IT manage and control all of that so it's secure and governed and watertight? So I'm going to end on this final thought, because whether you're new to MuleSoft and you're just evaluating us, or you've been using us for a little while, or whether you're like a long-time user, there's different levels of value. And the whole point of this conversation isn't actually go use MuleSoft. The whole point of this conversation is think differently about your digital assets and how you're going to open them up to the organization so you can drive much faster innovation. Because the reality is the nature of innovation has changed. So when we talk to our customers, and we've got independent reports, when people do integrations on our platform, it's a great platform for doing integrations, and that doesn't really go away. There's always going to be integrations, things that aren't APIs that have to be connected. And we're typically, at the low end, 2.5 times more productive than the platforms that are out there. And then moving towards API-led, this approach of breaking up the enterprise with APIs adds another level of efficiency. Right, by adding a methodology in the way in which you actually open up data and capabilities on your legacy apps and your existing app infrastructure, can give you a 5x return on the ability to deliver projects faster. And a lot of our customers are in this realm right now, which is why we're talking about ecosystems, because ecosystems basically says, there should be a strategy for opening up some of those APIs or a version of those APIs to a broader ecosystem so more of your organization can discover, use, and get access to the data and capabilities that you have. And then furthermore, as you get comfortable with that, actually pushing some of those capabilities even further out to external ecosystems like your partners and anyone you have, your supply chain, for example. And that's the key here. These ecosystems are really what drive the innovation. The API is the building block, but the way you actually get value out of that building block is by putting it in the hands of people that can actually go and build things. And so, I urge everyone in this room is you're a builder, and the next thing you build could have a very lasting impact, not just on delivering a project for your organization, but the speed in which your company can innovate. Thank you.